New York City today is an international center for ideas and policies in building vibrant, green urban communities. Our progress is truly remarkable when considering where New York City was just 35 years ago. When I was young, a plan for New York City's future would have seemed challenging, to say the least. The city was focused entirely on solving immediate crisis. The city almost went bankrupt. Businesses were leaving, homes were abandoned, crime was on the rise, and our parks were in ruins. New York City seemed unsafe, undesirable, and hopeless. Today is a very different story. A record 50 million tourists visited New York City last year. Crime is at an all-time low. Today, for the first time since World War II, the average New Yorker is living longer than the average American. Our population is 8.4 million and growing. The challenges New York City faces today are from the challenges of the 1970s. Our population will increase by 1 million additional residents by 2030, putting added strain on our resources. Our physical infrastructure is a century old or more and showing its age, and we have to meet the challenges of global climate change with new knowledge and capabilities. Meeting these challenges, on Earth Day 2007, Mayor Bloomberg launched one of the key initiatives of his administration, Plan YC. This is the most sweeping plan for our environment in the city's modern history. The plan focuses on 6 key aspects of the environment: land, air, water, energy, climate change, and transportation. And when the mayor announced this plan, he said, "I'd like to suggest that we face up to these challenges not tomorrow, not in the future, not when it's too late, but right now. This is our opportunity to make the type of history that future generations will recognize and that future mayors will invoke on Earth Day." Plan YC is an action-oriented agenda that addresses the physical city and its potential. It includes solutions for improving our air quality, upgrading our energy infrastructure, reducing water pollution, cleaning up contaminated land, and creating more affordable and sustainable housing. In an effort to build a greener and greater city, the goals of Plan YC include planting 1 million trees by 2017, and we have already planted 600,000. Restoring and building new, much-needed large regional parks, and ensuring that all New Yorkers live no more than a 10-minute walk from a park or playground. And over the last 3 years, we've increased that percentage from 75 to 85%. New York's sustainable achievements are thanks to the efforts of several agencies, and we are humbled and grateful that the Lee Kuan Yew Prize Selection Committee awarded this honor in recognition of our teamwork. For example, New York City Department of Transportation and its Commissioner, Jeanette Sadiq Khan, have made our city's streets safer and more welcoming for pedestrians, motorists, and cyclists through the creation of bicycle lanes and pedestrian plazas. The New York City Department of City Planning and its Director and Commissioner, Amanda Burden, have worked to reshape our city by rezoning record numbers of areas, reimagining the waterfront, and reclaiming industrial sites for innovative public uses. And my agency, the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, is creating some of the most imaginative and exciting new parks anywhere in the world. This park is in the South Bronx. It's a former concrete plant that was in ruins. I'm going to speak about the projects that these agencies have made possible, the projects that caught the eyes of the Lee Kuan Yew World Prize City Evaluators. First, we have the Department of Transportation's initiative to repurpose the right-of-way. This heralds a new approach towards our city's 10,000 kilometers of streets and roads. The Department of Transportation is finding solutions to shrink our carbon footprint by cleaning the air of harmful pollutants produced by vehicle exhaust. Another goal is to encourage a safer street life. Roadways are being redesigned and traffic lanes removed to provide greater space and safety for bicyclists and pedestrians. Bicycling has become extremely popular in New York City. And this, by the way, is our transportation commissioner. She's very fashionable on a bike. While we may not yet be a bicycling city on the level of Copenhagen or Amsterdam or Beijing, the number of New Yorkers who bicycle to work and to school has doubled since 2007 and quadrupled in the last 10 years. To increase safety for bicyclists, more than 475 kilometers of bike lanes have been installed in New York City since 2005. In addition to this, protected bike lanes have been established to move cyclists out of harm's way. Here you can see the increase in the number of bike lanes. The Department of Transportation has also initiated what may be the largest bike share system in North America. Partnering with Citibank, the program will give New Yorkers access to sturdy, safe bikes at self-service docking stations around the city, similar to the existing programs in Paris and Guangzhou and London. The bikes can return to any station in the system. They create an efficient network with many possible combinations of departure and arrival. And Citi Bike will give New Yorkers an affordable and efficient option for short trips by providing ready access to a bike without having to worry about storage or maintenance. Pedestrians have also benefited from new public plazas, such as the one at the crossroads of the world, Times Square. By closing a major stretch of Times Square's famous Broadway to cars, pedestrians are now safer and able to enjoy an exciting new kind of public space. And Times Square, as someone said here at the conference, hey, if they can do it at New York, we can do it. It's just one example of how public pedestrian plazas are changing streets into vibrant spaces. New York City also has 50 new neighborhood plazas in development through the 5 boroughs. Turning clogged streets into comfortable plazas is one way to create new public spaces. Another technique New York has evolved is using the city's zoning regulations as a tool to leverage the creation of more public space through private investment. Since 2002, the city has rezoned 115 neighborhoods and communities across the city, in many instances replacing outdated development restrictions with much more desirable development designations that will stimulate private investment. As a condition of redevelopment, the city can also require private developers to invest in creating public open space. For example, the Department of City Planning in 2005 adopted the West Chelsea rezoning plan, which was recognized by the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize judges. Located on the far west side of Manhattan, this community was previously zoned for manufacturing and contained much underused land and buildings. Most notably, it included the abandoned High Line elevated rail line. This former freight railway was an unused piece of industrial infrastructure which was considered a blight on the area. The city and local and private property owners had originally planned to demolish it, but community advocates who were charmed by its renaturalization organized and created something called the Friends of the High Line. They successfully fought to work to raise money and to create design visions for this preservation and reuse. Now, under this West Chelsea rezoning, private property owners under or adjacent to the High Line are given development rights that they can sell to adjacent buildings. The adjacent property owners, in exchange for the right to build taller buildings, may be required to incorporate public access to the High Line or to make a financial contribution to a city-controlled fund to improve the High Line. Indeed, the High Line is proof that New York City can build a park anywhere, including 30 feet above the ground. But we weren't the first to build a park in the sky. First, we had the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and then a few years later, the Promenade Plantée in Paris, which is a modern-day park built on top of another abandoned elevated railroad. And here in Singapore, the forest canopy and treetop walks in the Southern Ridges parks give park goers a new perspective in some of the country's oldest forests. And if it's spectacular, I went there yesterday. If you have a chance, you must go visit it. The Parks Department, City Planning, Economic Development Corporation, and the Friends of the High Line worked together to plan, design, construct, and operate the High Line using sustainable practices. Every city has outmoded infrastructure that can be put back into public use, and we believe the High Line can be a model for parks and planning projects around the world. The creation of the High Line and the rezoning of the area from manufacturing to residential use has led to the construction of more than 40 new buildings surrounding it. This represents $2 billion in private sector investment, more than 10 times the roughly $150 million in public investment in the High Line. Much like Singapore, New York City is a city of islands and water. It was established by the Dutch in 1624 for the purpose of trade. Shipping piers were once abundant along all the waterfront. Tugboats and barges were used to transport goods all along the New York harbor. But then things changed. Beginning in the late 1950s, new highways were put through neighborhoods. New bridges led to the distribution of goods by trucks rather than by boats. This changed investment in the waterfront dramatically. It was no longer the center of transport. In the decades that followed, our waterfront became an eyesore, an unwanted combination of rotting piers, parking lots, and abandoned industrial sites. In 1992, the Department of City Planning issued the New York City Comprehensive Waterfront Plan. For the first time in our city's history, there was a long-range vision for the shoreline. Now it was a place not only for commerce and industry, but a place for people to live in. It also included returning the waterfront as a natural area, as wildlife habitat. And then Mayor Bloomberg unveiled Vision 2020 Waterfront Plan. New waterfront parks are part of a dramatic transformation of New York City's shoreline. They're emblems of planning, action, and hope. For example, in 2005, the city rezoned 175 blocks of privately owned land in the Greenpoint and Williamsburg sections of Brooklyn, replacing rundown warehouses and low-rise manufacturing buildings with high-rise residential buildings. Under the provisions of the city's zoning that relate specifically to waterfront development, we have been able to require each developer along the waterfront to set aside shoreline portions of their property and to create public waterfront parks that they have to design, they build according to our specifications, and then they pay to maintain them, or they pay us to maintain them. Each privately developed esplanade will eventually link into a 1.5 continuous esplanade, and here you can see the first parks built by private developers. The city is also making investments in rezoning the area through the acquisition of former industrial land to create a new 28-acre or 12-hectare public park at Bushwick Inlet and other public parks along the Brooklyn waterfront nearby. And this leads us to Brooklyn Bridge Park, the third project evaluated by the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize panelists. With 2.5 million residents, Brooklyn is the most populous of New York City's 5 boroughs. If it were a separate city, Brooklyn would be the 4th largest city in the United States. Yet not since the creation of Marine Park in the 1930s has Brooklyn seen the birth of a park on the scale of Brooklyn Bridge Park. Brooklyn Bridge Park is the ultimate recycled park. Through adaptive reuse, we are turning these abandoned piers and warehouses into a waterfront park with beaches, fishing piers, canals, paddling waters for kayaks, and restored wetlands. You can see in the picture on the right, as we're digging a tunnel through the East River for enhanced train access, we're using the stone that's churned up from that to create the hills that make this park. The first portions were opened 2 years ago, with more now in development. The park brings visitors right to the edge of the world's busiest harbor, or not the busiest harbor, but perhaps one of the most attractive, with majestic views of Manhattan skyline and the Brooklyn Bridge, for which the park is named. These stairs are made from recycled stone from a bridge that was rebuilt, and the entire 85-acre park is irrigated using recaptured stormwater. It uses recycled wood from demolished buildings and stone from rebuilt bridges. The park's hills are artificial, built with stone from the digging of a railroad tunnel, and we're preserving the old piers as ecological habitat. This is a good example of sustainable design in full practice. The sustainable design principles that guide Brooklyn Bridge Park are now present in parks across the entire city. Last year, the Parks Department, in partnership with the NGO Design Trust for Public Space, published the nation's first how-to manual for designing 21st century urban parks. The theme is this: parks in the 21st century must not only be beautiful places, they must be healthy ecosystems, they must be resilient and sustainable. New York City's new and restored parks should not be thought of as simply natural landscapes. Every aspect of a new high-performance landscape, the soil, the plants, the water levels, the installation, are as precisely engineered as a new bridge or road. From building or retrofitting green roofs, to implementing stormwater capture systems, to converting old landfills into new playgrounds, sustainable practices will help us design for a higher level of use and a higher level of environmental responsibility. The guidelines encourage designs for fitness. In our city, parks are one of the few places for active recreation. We work fitness into our plans. We include greenways for biking and walking. We are transforming part-time schoolyards into full-time playgrounds, and the children are helping us to design them. We're converting the old 1950s asphalt play yards into synthetic turf fields and installing night lighting so people can play from morning till late at night. And while Brooklyn Bridge Park is a macro example of sustainable design on a large scale, Let's look at the typical urban playground, for example, Pearly Gates Playground in the South Bronx. In addition to the typical play equipment, we also install innovatively designed rain gardens to capture stormwater runoff from the asphalt pavement. If every park or playground had a similar transformation, the benefits would add up. Bigger planting beds absorb stormwater, which then improve the health of the existing trees. They provide more shade, more oxygen, and cooler, cleaner air. Similarly, the planned so-called Sponge Park, to be built on a street end along the Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn, is a 40-foot wide park designed specifically to function as an actual sponge. It absorbs and cleans stormwater before it gets released into the old polluted canal. And perhaps nowhere is the transformation of the city's landscape more dramatic than along the Bronx River. For centuries, the Bronx River, which New Yorkers know as the city's only freshwater river, was used for commerce. It had mills in the 18th and 19th century. It had factories in the 20th century. But by the 1980s, it's an open sewer. Its water is heavily polluted and full of abandoned cars and other garbage. But community activists in the South Bronx, one of the poorest areas in the country, began to demand change. Neighborhood residents and groups who cared about the environment came together as the Bronx River Alliance. Through the Alliance's work, hundreds of partners from New York City and communities upstream are rescuing this river from its current condition as a polluted and neglected waterway to its new life as a thriving and healthy chain of natural areas and recreational sites. It's become vital to the community once again, and the neighborhood residents come out every day and every weekend to help us clean this park. They fight for its renewal and for its creation. Another successful example of New York City's emerging waterfront parks is along the Hudson River on Manhattan's west side. The area that became the Hudson River Park was once a center for passenger ships and freighter ships in North America. Following the decay and neglect of the west side of Manhattan along the Hudson River in the 1970s and 80s, a number of projects were proposed to revitalize the region, with a new park emerging as the best choice. Each of the neighborhoods along the park has a distinctive look and personality. Different designers were selected for each one after a master plan was developed. So there are diverse landscapes and recreational experiences. As a result, Hudson River Park has unique playgrounds, great outdoor art, boathouses, and interpretations of history. Now, we are not alone in our efforts to transform our waterfront. Here in Singapore, they have converted 250 acres of waterfront into the spectacular gardens by the bay. If you have not been there yet, you should take a look. It just opened 3 days ago, including this forest of super trees that are 80 to 160 feet tall, vertical planters holding more than 160,000 plants, solar panels collect electricity to light the trees at night. It is a spectacular new urban space. Of course, in London, the docklands were reclaimed in 1981. More areas are being transformed through the Olympics. In Beijing, wetlands are being restored in each of the city's 16 districts, with 10 new parks being created over the next 5 years. But one of the keys to our success in New York City is this, and perhaps something uniquely New York, which is the emergence of strong community partnerships. During the fiscal crisis of the 1960s and 1970s, Central Park was not spared from the effects of our staffing and budget cuts. But even when the economy recovered, there was a sense that the maintenance of parks could no longer depend on funding from the city's budget alone. It was from this idea that Central Park Conservancy, the first big public-private partnership for parks, was born. Since its founding in 1981, the Conservancy has raised more than $470 million in private investment, has radically transformed the landscape of the park. This is the Great Lawn today. Through these public-private partnerships, we share responsibilities for New York City's public parks with outside organizations, conservancies, NGOs, friends of groups. New Yorkers become engaged in the lives of their parks. They advocate for the parks through changing government administrations and changing budgets. This model has since spread to parks across all 5 boroughs. While most of the parks are still maintained by the city-funded workers through tax levy dollars, this will continue to be the case. At the same time, many parks are supported by NGOs in varying degrees across the city. Each year, $160 million is raised in private charitable support and earned revenue by our partners to support maintenance, expansion, and program. There are many models. At Brooklyn Bridge Park, for example, this is a rendering, and what you see behind the park are the proposed hotel and residential complex, whose construction will fund the ongoing maintenance of the park. Portions of the park in both Hudson River and Brooklyn Bridge Park are set aside to generate revenue to maintain the parks going forward. The city will not be providing ongoing support at these parks. However, the majority of our public-private partnerships are much more informal. People don't give money, they give labor. They connect people, engage community members, provide programming, and keep the park clean and beautiful. I've presented some very important projects, but perhaps the most exciting one is the one that's coming up, and that's the creation of Fresh Kills Park. Fresh Kills opened as a landfill in 1947. It was at one point the largest municipal garbage dump in the world. Over the next 30 years, we will transform the site into a 2,000-acre 21st century park with canoeing, mountain biking, and hiking, the largest park developed in New York City in over 100 years. Some of that is very high-tech, and some of it low-tech. As we speak, Fresh Kills is experimenting with using goats instead of lawnmowers to control invasive species such as Phragmites communalis, which are a fire hazard in the dry seasons. The goats like to eat the Phragmites and many other invasive plants. Fresh Kills Park speaks for the values and hopes of contemporary New Yorkers, not just by providing diverse recreational opportunities, but by emphasizing environmental restoration, sustainability, and public concern for our human impact on the earth. Over the next 5 to 7 years, a new playground will be built at the entrance to the park. A public restroom, wind-powered, green-roofed, and heated through geothermal. A seed farm that will grow native plants from locally collected seeds. An amphitheater built into the edge of an old garbage mound. And the service road formerly used by garbage trucks, rebuilt for active sports. Even today, before these projects are completed, we have begun to use the site as the park it will someday be. This looks to you like a natural meadow, perhaps an alpine meadow, but it's on top of a pile of garbage more than 70 meters high. I hope that in my talk today, I've helped to illuminate some of the wonderful things happening in New York City. Most of these are replicable in cities across the world. From what the Department of Transportation to create much more room for bicycles and for pedestrians to make that city pedestrian and bicycle friendly can be done in any city. The Department of City Planning's rezonings, which led to the creative partnerships that created the High Line and our waterfront parks, where the private sector is paying for developing the parks and maintaining them. To our development of Brooklyn Bridge Park and so many other waterfront parks, we are creating a city that is more livable, that is more vibrant, and more sustainable for residents and visitors alike. On behalf of Mayor Bloomberg, our 8.4 million residents and taxpayers, we are honored and humbled to receive the 2012 Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize. Thank you.